Thanks, Burkhard, for the kind introduction. Yes, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to share with you what is happening on the ground in China, because as Burkhard just mentioned, China has been on the map of many of us for various reasons, and so far the discussion was dominated by its production capacity, the oversupply, trade disputes, whether here with the US or now with the European Union ongoing. But that picture's, I hope, about to change soon, actually already, that now China is pretty much looking as well how to tap its domestic potential. And I would like to kick off my presentation with giving you a snapshot on what kind of policies or laws and targets are shaping China's national regulatory landscape, basically shaping the business environment for all stakeholders concerned. And in this context, I mean, the most important document is the Renewable Energy Promotion Law, effective since January 2006. And it's basically for the first time that the central government in Beijing has officially recognized that utilizing locally available renewable energy sources is of strategic importance for the country in the context of energy security, energy independence, environmental pollution, etc., etc. At the same time, back in 2006, China committed itself that by 2020, 50% of the renewable energy or final energy shall be met by renewable energy sources. By the end of last year, this was around 10%, and by the end of 2015, that means the end of the 12th five-year plan, shall amount to 11.4%. And I believe China is pretty much on track in achieving these targets. Another important policy is the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard, in place since 2007. So local power utilities and grid operators are supposed to meet certain quotas in their respective portfolios in terms of power generation or the amount of green electricity transmitted and distributed via the grid. So far, the RPS has been kept very simple in terms of design, and the decision how to comply with the quota was left to the utilities. So of course they choose the cheapest available option, so mainly hydropower. At a later stage, wind came into the picture, and now a little bit of PV as well. However, the RPS policy is right now under review, and it was supposed to come out last year already, but due to, let's say, ongoing internal negotiations among Chinese stakeholders involved, so it has been delayed and might come in effect by the third quarter this year or even later this year. That will be way more sophisticated, and including some penalties in case the utilities are not or don't comply with the requirements stipulated in the RPS. Well, like in any other country as well, the utilization of renewable energies doesn't come along for free. At the end of the day, someone has to pay for. Central government Beijing kept it very simple, so they simply added a surcharge on every rated user, and they put this money into the Renewable Energy Development Fund, and that helps the central and local governments to meet the financial obligations. Most likely there will be another increase necessary because the budget is no longer sufficient due to the rapid domestic market development, mainly so far driven by wind, but now PVs as well coming in the picture. 2 years ago, for the first time, a national feed-in tariff was introduced. I will say more about that, and we'll just conclude this first slide with, because another main driver, which was once it will become in effect, will be the national energy law, which has been in the making for at least 7 to 8 years already. And this should become effective before the end of 2015. And again, this law is being drafted against the background energy security is a major concern. Yeah? Just to give you one example, already today China needs to import more than 55% of oil in order to meet its domestic demand. More than 50% is considered crucial. So again, here, this is something of great concern. So, and that's why against this background, this national energy law has been in the making, and once will become effective, that will be another driver for large-scale renewable energy deployment for all renewables. With my next slide, I would like to shed some light on the multiple domestic market programs, all designed to stimulate local demand for concerning photovoltaic. In total, 4 programs. It started way back in actually late 2008 with the national tendering. That means the central government based in Beijing, they have put up a few projects up for tender they invited interested parties to bid for. They hoped through such kind of competitive bidding mechanism that the market itself will establish a level of feed-in tariff to be paid for each kilowatt hour generated and for up to 20 years. However, after 2 rounds, they basically stopped this national tendering program because in particular large-scale state-owned enterprises, they bid it so low so that the majority of the PV industry, which is actually privately owned, they started to complain because they said, well, we don't have these vast resources like these large state-owned enterprises, so we are not in a position to compete on that level. So that's the main reason why they stopped the national tendering. Then in a few selected provinces, they introduced a provincial feed-in tariff program. It's not a surprise that in particular the first 3 indicated here did so, because they are home to the vast majority of the Chinese PV manufacturers. And since 2009 started the global economic crisis, and in order to help them or to reach out to them, they introduced this provincial feed-in tariff program. Liaoning, the 4th province indicated here, they did it so because they felt, well, because back then there was only one single tariff introduced in July 2011, and Liaoning then felt, well, none of these projects will develop in our province, which is in the eastern part of China, so they offered a 30% premium on top of the tariff in order to make it more attractive. Then the last 2, the National Rooftop and the Golden Sun in particular, what they have both in common is the government is offering capital subsidies, so basically around about 50 to 60% of the hardware was the government paid for. The Golden Sun in particular, as you can see, more than 5.7 gigawatt of projects were approved over the last 4 years. Didn't turn out to be so successful or as hoped for or as intended. That means it seems to be that 80% of all projects were not delivered on time, not according to the agreed schedule. Quality has been compromised. Companies deliberately delayed the procurement of the hardware for the systems, hoping or speculating on, because prices are still falling or were still falling. Yeah? So they were hoping, well, get the down payment from the government first, then hang on for some time, yeah, and maybe then this 50-60% share of, let's say, the government procurement, yeah, would have increased to 70, 80 or more percent. Yeah? So right now the Golden Sun program has basically been stopped and discontinued, and the lesson learned, because it did not provide enough or sufficient incentives to really focus on quality, has been abandoned. So no more as well in the future, I believe, the Chinese government will allocate money or provide money for in terms of capital subsidies. If you combine that, and I mean this is a great learning experience for the Chinese government. In total, over the last 4 years, 6.5 gigawatts of projects received official approval, mainly driven by the National Golden Sun project. Then, I mentioned it already, in July 2011, a national feed-in tariff was introduced, and since then, companies taking advantage of that, they put up PV projects up for tender. So that's just a snapshot on how the impact of this feed-in tariff was played out over the last 2 years. 2.5 gigawatt the first year, almost 100% increase last year. So the national feed-in tariff certainly gave some impetus or incentive for companies to getting engaged in the PV project development space. Take a closer look at March this year, for instance. Just in one single month, 43 tenders were released, amounting to around about 830 megawatt. These 43 tenders are spread across 18 provinces in total out of 31. 2 years ago, you would have seen only some indications in the far west of China. So now it's nice to see that it's now a more even market development throughout the country. But still, there are some concentrations, as indicated, that basically around about 40% out of these 800 plus megawatts are just concentrated in 3 provinces because they offer almost ideal conditions for large-scale ground-mounted system development. Taking a closer look in terms of project capacity, well, as you can see, there is certainly, Chinese companies go for large-scale projects in general. Yeah, I mean, the largest shares between 10 and 20 megawatts, and then some are between 1 and 5 megawatts. So there's a clear tendency towards larger systems. Looking at the project types, it's pretty much even, looking at ground-mounted and rooftop. Rooftop because the government is right now very keen in promoting industrial and commercial rooftop applications, because the large-scale ground-mounted systems, they took place in the western part of China, where, well, the sun shines brightest, but it's far away from the load centers all across the eastern part of China. So grid connection is an issue, transmission and distribution. So that's why the government today is very keen rather in providing incentives for distributed generation. Finally, in terms of project execution, as well as stipulated in these tender documents, well, as you can see, it's between 6 weeks and 6 months. They all would like to meet, let's say, the deadline for the feed-in tariff, for the present feed-in tariff, before the end of this year. That's why it's, in some cases, pretty tight schedule. Well, looking at the most favored destination for project development is the province of Qinghai. It's in the western part of China. It's twice the size of Germany, 5 million inhabitants. Average altitude is around about 3,000 meters. Very good conditions for large-scale ground mounts. You see single project with a capacity of 200 megawatt and larger. I've been there in early April this year, and it's amazing when you fly in and you see all these dots everywhere, and the closer you get to Golmud, this is the city, the size is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's really amazing. You see all types of applications, fixed, single axis, double axis, CPV projects. CPV projects, for the one concerned or interested, 50 megawatt systems are under construction, to my knowledge the largest worldwide. So, given these kind of conditions, Qinghai managed to maintain its pole position within the Chinese context, as I mentioned already, the most favored destination for project developers. But there are, of course, as well challenges. I mentioned already, this high solar radiation levels are in the west, far away from the load centers in the east. So here, logistical issues, spare part supply is really an issue. Then, well, I mentioned it, infrastructure, the existing grid infrastructure is weak, so months of delay until your system finally get connected. Local labor is an issue, not only in these regions, as well basically across China. And there are some environmental challenges like sandstorms, as you can see from these pictures. So once in a while, so if you talk about operation maintenance, that's certainly a challenge, because it's a very semi-arid desert area, so water is just not around. I learned from a talk with the operator of a CPV project. They were saying, well, once the efficiency is dropping below 8%, they start cleaning. Otherwise, they would have to do it on a daily basis. Yeah? So no one can do that. Yeah? So that's certainly some challenges project developers are facing in these areas. Still, some few more words on the national feed-in tariff. As mentioned, introduced in July 2011, so far the design very simple, one single tariff for the entire country. That's the main reason why all the projects, or the 80% roundabout, of the projects developed so far took place in the western part of China, and just a few, well, close to 20% in the eastern part. This is about to change. That means the future feed-in tariff level will be determined by the level of solar radiation in a given location. So basically there are 4 classes as indicated in this chart. And well, the largest tariff, or the highest tariff, is in the order of 1 RMB, is around about 16 euro cents plus minus, US dollar cents, sorry. Hoping that basically a more even market development will take place throughout the country, and not that it will no longer concentrated in some western areas or western regions of China. At the same, so these tariffs are pretty much addressing large-scale ground-mounted systems. There's as well a discussion underway in determining or setting tariffs for distributed generations types of projects. And there are 2 concepts. The one is basically on-site generation, on-site consumption up to 100%, or on-site generation I will consume up to a certain percentage, and the rest I will sell to the grid operator. Any day, basically, this new feed-in tariff regime could be announced. It has been delayed because the solar trade dispute negotiation or discussions are still ongoing between the European Commission and China. So that's why an introduction of the amended feed-in tariff has been delayed for already a couple of months. Well, terms of price developments, looking at the modules, not only prices for modules are falling outside of China as well within China, and you see a major drop between 2008 and 2009, and then between 2011 and 2012. Today, you can get modules for 4 RMB. This is below 50 euro cents for each watt. In terms of systems, price development again, a major fall between 2011, or major reduction between 2011 and 2012, sorry. And today we talk about around about €1 for each watt installed. So that's and lower, so that's an average price. So there's an ongoing, price competition, and they really squeeze each other along the value chain. But this is about to change, and I will talk more about this later on. Looking at the 2012 market development as a whole, I mentioned earlier these national programs, the Golden Sun and Rooftop, then projects taking advantage of the need of the national feed-in tariff. So in total, we talk about something of a pipeline in the order of 9.5 gigawatt last year. Well, pipeline is always sounds good and it's nice, but in the end of the day, why we are doing this business? Because of the installation, because we want to generate green electricity. So the interesting part, why here 1.1 and 5 gigawatt indicated in terms of last year's installation, these are official figures communicated by different governmental institutions based in Beijing. It's no mystery why there are different figures. It's simply that the methodology in how they count installed systems are just different. And so far, the still very official figure is 3.5 gigawatt of additional installed capacity, but the indications it's rather closer to 5 gigawatt. But again, installation does not necessarily translate into grid connected. At least 50% of these systems are still waiting for their grid connection. So that's a serious ongoing issue. Another reason, another driver why the government is now very keen in order to promote distributed generation. So get these systems on the roof, on-site generation and on-site consumption. They would like to relieve the burden, or the pressure to the grid infrastructure. Looking at the 12th five-year plan, what's in for solar energy? Last year, finally, a 21 gigawatt target was announced. A budget in the order of 30 billion euros have been earmarked for this purpose. Long-term target 50 or perhaps 75 gigawatt by 2020. Another program is still in the making. What I have indicated here is 500 megawatt of distributed generation for each province, translating into 15 plus gigawatt. Very generous now, the State Grid Corporation for 10 megawatt rooftop systems. In the past, you easily had to pay a grid connection fee in the order of 50,000 euro. Now no more, up to 6 gigawatt is free of charge. So the State Grid Corporation, they really changed the behavior attitude from very non-supportive to very supportive. And for this year, the National Energy Administration has announced an official installation target of 10 gigawatt. I rather would say 7, 8 gigawatts, but not 10. And last but not least, the new premier in charge since March this year, he announced a number of measures in order to ensure more healthy and long-term development of its national PV industry for the years to come. Looking at the geographical focus and market segmentations, because there's an unofficial target of 35 gigawatt now. It's not fixed anywhere in any of the official documentations, but government officials made it clear, well, we are aiming at 35 by 2015. So what I've indicated here is 10 gigawatt in the west, still ground-mounted systems, but I've mentioned already, the government is very keen in promoting distributed generation, so that's basically all shifting to the east of China. The two spots which I have left white, the one is Tibet, the other one is Taiwan, so for known reasons, put it this way, I left this out. How does the market is expected to develop over the next couple of years until the end of the 12th five-year plan? Still I've indicated the 3.5 gigawatt installed last year. This year I expect something in the order of 8, and I'm pretty much sure China will manage to achieve the 35 gigawatt until the end of 2015. Where do I see the future domestic growth driver? Imagine China's urbanization. Each year, around about 20 million people are moving from rural areas to urban areas. And they all want to enjoy a certain lifestyle. So that brings along another demand for power, energy, electricity. So this will, in my case, from my point of view, certainly one driver why China will be in the future even more focusing on distributed generation. And mainly so far, and for the time being, in the next 2-3 years, pretty much looking at industrial and commercial rooftop. Residential is close to zero for the time being. This is at the moment not really a market segment, in contrary to what we have just learned, what is happening in Japan. And by the end of 2030, China has most likely 1 billion people living in cities, out of 1.3, 1.4 billion. So the demand is giving, and that of course will, what I call China's urban solarization, will put an enormous stress on the existing and anticipated grid infrastructure. So again, on-site generation, on-site consumption, that's today's mantra in China. So in this case, in order to facilitate, to enable such kind of urban solarization, new energy demonstration cities have already been identified, 108 in particular, or to be exact, 6% of these new energy demonstration cities, 6% of its local power needs shall be met by renewables. And by the end of 2015, we talk about maybe 10,000 villages. So there's certainly already some program behind in order to facilitate the deployment of photovoltaic. Solar city master plans have been elaborated for a number of cities throughout China, looking at the rooftop potential in particular. I mentioned before, a new program is in the making, amounting to 15.5 gigawatt of distributed generation. Most likely next month they will identify the so-called demonstration zones for that throughout the country. What else? In particular in the province of Guangdong, it's next to Hong Kong, Shenzhen, where you have, wherever you go, factories, just factories. I mean, it's the powerhouse of China. I mean, 40% of China's GDP is just generated in one single province. So here they say, well, why not, use the existing roof space? And there will be demand for more sophisticated solutions, including storage. Because many of these factories, they rely on a diesel generator backup system. Because once in a while, depends on the season or the time of the year, when the rivers are running low, hydropower cannot generate as much as before, so they're being cut off from power supply. And then you have only electricity on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So that's why they have lots of these diesel generator backup systems, but it's expensive, logistic-wise challenging, polluting, so storage could become an option for these kind of factories. Pilot residential initiatives are in the making, 50,000 roofs here and there. Let's see how this will play out. Finally, a number of, actually 8 pilot low carbon cities have been identified. And again, looking at the BIPV in particular, and BAPV has been chosen for further demand. Smart grid pilot programs. Well, opportunities, where do I see them? All right. One slide. Downstream sector in particular. Everything from system design, construction, operation, maintenance, monitoring, storage. There's a huge demand because given the still limited practical experience of many Chinese project developers and EPC contractors, there's certainly demand in teaming up or do it on your own. Training and education. China needs an army of properly trained technicians. There's such a huge demand. You really find properly trained staff is challenging. What else? I mentioned it already with this Guangdong province, that sophisticated system solutions will be needed. BIPV, looking at this millions of new buildings to be built over the next 15 years. CPV, yes, still a niche, but China has the potential to go for it, and financial affordability is certainly a plus. And last but not least, upstream sector in the manufacturing part. And China is offering attractive incentives for foreign companies, for equipment manufacturers, in particular, and settle down in the western part of China. Well, coming to my last slide, looking at my PV outlook, the political commitment in Beijing is given, not only in Beijing, as well on a very local, provincial level. A national roadmap for renewable energies is in the making. Some figures have been released so far. This is not a double typo. It means 2,500 gigawatt by 2015 has been estimated as a potential, which China could be realized. Then, as I mentioned, capital subsidy support-based schemes will be no more offered by the national government, will be replaced by the feed-in tariff, performance-based. That means each kilowatt hour generated counts. So quality will become very important from now on. I haven't mentioned this at all, the strategic emerging industries. In total there are 7, I mean it's IT, new materials, high-end equipment manufacturing, telecommunication, etc. And these 7 strategic emerging industries are supposed to be the future pillars of China's economy. And they want to make sure that they will be around the top 3 of global suppliers for such kind of technologies and services. Looking at the market, yes, China has the potential to impress us all for the years to come in terms of annual installations. I mentioned a number of times now, distributed solution will be king. Well, quality will replace the so far practiced engagement. So that means that now, I mean, from now on, yeah, every kilowatt hour counts, yeah, and that will change as well the consciousness and the attitude for project developers and EPC contractors. And yes, from my point of view, China is just too big to be ignored, yeah, by foreign companies. You know, certainly lots of opportunities. Yes, it doesn't come along without challenges, but any other market is pretty much the same. Thank you very much for your attention.
These are really impressive numbers. The potential of 2,500 gigawatts of solar. Mm. But people are still saying, I hear it, I don't know if it's still true, a new coal plant every week. Is that true anymore?
No.
It's not true anymore.
It's changed. I mean, yeah, and we need to get this out of the media. I'm hearing this so often, you know, every 5 days a new coal-fired power plant is being built. No, no more. Yes, they still build because they need it, yeah, because I mean, the demand is given, yeah, but it's no more as much as it was in the past.
But are emissions still growing? And is this, at what point will solar, or could solar get to a point where emissions will peak? Is there any estimate on that?
Oh, well, I thought the peak will become maybe by 2040 or so. I mean, that is still some way to go, yeah, but on top of my head, I can't give you exact year, but I mean, this is playing around with figures in your nice Excel sheet, you know, at the end of the day, yeah, and still many uncertainties. Yeah, there's a lot of guessing, I would say. Yeah.